When we worked in children's ministry and with puppet ministry, there was a song that we used every once in a while that was titled "I Just Want to Be a Sheep." Now, if you ask people, what animal would you want to be? Sheep would probably not be at the top of most people's lists. But in this episode, we're going to actually discuss the idea of righteous sheep. Welcome to the He So I Project podcast, produced by Redeeming Identity. This is a podcast for a community of believers that are seeking to know who God is so that they can discover who He created them to be. I am your host, Dr. Eric Moyer, author, researcher, podcaster, and for this discussion, photographer. Now, this past month, we have been discussing God's righteousness. What does it mean and how it impacts who we are? But in this episode, we're going to continue that discussion, but we're going to do it in a new way and a way that I hope that we'll continue to do each month. But it's by looking at an image from our God's Glory Gallery. So, the purpose of this God's Glory Gallery, if you haven't gone and looked at it yet, is just as a reminder that God wants us to know who He is. Isn't that's kind of an amazing thing, is that God, the God of the universe, the creator, wants us to know who He is. Now, one of my friends has stated that for God to demonstrate Himself to us, He actually wrote two books. The first book most people would think of is the Bible, which is the way most people get to know who God is this day and age. And the second book is creation. Now, I just sometimes wonder if that should be reversed because the first book that God wrote about himself was creation. Later on, we compiled everything together and wrote and put together the Bible, but because creation came first. Now, if you remember this, the Bible says in Psalms 19, 1 through 2, the heavens declare the glory of God, and the sky above proclaims his handiwork. Day to day pours out speech, and night to night reveals knowledge. So, the purpose of God's Glory Gallery is a extension of the purpose of the He So I project. It is really to help people know who God is. Mm. But in this way, it's not necessarily going to the Bible to search out who God is, but it's reminding us that God shows himself to us all the time in everyday scenes and the place and the things that we see around us. And specifically for me, I love the landscapes and the animals and his creation and looking to see what he is communicating to us by his creation. So, part of this project, the God's Glory Gallery, is to create a collection of images that remind us about who God is through his identity. So, we need to be reminded about the power of images to discover who God is. I've always loved photography. Photography is something that I've always been drawn to. I actually took photography whenever I was in high school. I remember actually taking classes in photography where you actually had to learn how to go into a dark room and develop film and do everything in the dark room because it wasn't digital cameras at that point. So that's giving away a little bit of my age. And how long it's been that I've been taking photos. So whenever you had to actually have those little canisters of film that you had to take out of the back of the camera, you had to really make sure that you didn't let light be shown on them or you could overdevelop them. And it wasn't as easy to do photography as it is now, where many of our uh, many of our cameras have more tools to do photography than we had with the cameras that we had back then. But I remember that I always loved photography. I actually even won a photography contest whenever I was in high school. In our local region. Now, I had the opportunity to live for several years in Colorado. Now, if you want a place that really stirs the imagination of the majesty of God and God's creation, Colorado is a beautiful place to be. But God's creation is everywhere, and God shows his fingerprint in his creation everywhere. But one of the things, whenever we were living there, is that we wanted to see the bighorn sheep in Rocky Mountain National Park. And we lived there for 5 years, and we went up to Rocky Mountain National Park all the time. And we saw so many different animals. We saw the elk, we saw deer, we saw a moose. Now, we never saw a bear up in Rocky Mountain National Park, but we also, for 5 years, we never really saw a herd of the bighorn sheep. We just never were in the right place at the right time to see them. But a couple of years, whenever we were visiting up in Colorado, we were driving along the canyon up to Rocky Mountain National Park, and on the side of the road, we saw a herd of bighorn sheep just hanging out on the canyon walls. And with my camera, I had to stop, spend quite a bit of time just taking pictures of the bighorn sheep. And as I was taking pictures, I was considering and I was thinking about the idea of God's Glory Gallery. And I was looking at these bighorn sheep, and the question came to me, it's like, well, how do these sheep reflect the glory of God? How do they reflect the nature of God? And one of the things that came to my mind was they reflect his righteousness. Now, you may be going, okay, you're making a pretty big stretch here. I mean, sheep being righteous. What does that even mean? Well, to kind of get to this, we have to first understand what does it mean to be righteous. Now, righteous is a word that we use in church a lot. We talk about God's righteousness. We talk about being righteous. We talk about different things having the quality of righteousness. But do we really understand what this means? Now, typically, whenever we talk about righteousness, we typically associate it with doing the right things. We talk about that someone is righteous, and we kind of associate that with someone who is perfect because they've done everything that they were supposed to do. But really, that diminishes, that is a smaller meaning than what it really means. So, understand why I was thinking about this idea of righteousness when I was thinking about the sheep, I want to go back and I want to just really talk about what does it mean to be righteous from a biblical standpoint. So, first off, let's talk about the Old Testament. The Old Testament, the Hebrew word is sadiq, which is the idea of a standard or a norm. Now, to get an idea of that is you guys all have a ruler probably somewhere in your house, a ruler, a tape measure, or something. And on there, there is a measure called an inch. Now, that measure of an inch, if you take that inch and you compare that to a ruler in another house, those 2 inches are supposed to be the same size. They're supposed to measure the same length. And that's because somewhere in the division of norms and measures in this country and in other countries, they have agreed to what is the length of an inch. They've defined that, and that is a norm. And so now, every other place where we define what an inch is, it has to go back to that definition of what does it mean to be an inch. Now, in the Bible, it says in Psalms 18:30, "The Lord is righteous in all his ways, and he is perfect in all that he does." That idea of righteousness in from God's standpoint is that he is the norm. He is the standard. He is the definition, and he defines what is right and what is wrong. So whenever it look we look at this term of being righteous, God sees us as either being righteous or he sees us as being wicked. Malachi 3:18 says, "Then once more you shall see the distinction between the righteous and the wicked, between one who serves God and one who does not serve him." That word, when it says one who serves God and one who does not serve him, that's talking about one who is a servant of God or one who is not a servant of God. The other way that we can, this idea of righteous, being righteous, is supported in the New Testament by the Greek word dikaiosune. I'm hoping I say that right. But what this means is this is the same idea. It's living up to our design or living into the design that was given to us or to the standard. So whenever I think about righteous, I think about something that is being used or living into its purpose, living into its design, living into the what it was designed for. And so, whenever the reason I thought about the bighorn sheep being righteous is because they were living as they were hanging out on these canyon walls. They were living out the design of their creator, God. They were being what they were created to be. These are amazing animals. And God left his imprint on how they were created so that they could function in the way that they lived. Okay, so to understand that, let's talk about some of the facts about some these bighorn sheep. Okay, they're this set of bighorn sheep, okay, that live in Rocky Mountain National Park. There is bighorn sheep in Rocky Mountain. There's bighorn sheep we also found in Yellowstone in Montana. Basically, in that Rocky Mountain region, there is this species of bighorn sheep that is uniquely designed to live and to exist in that environment. So they live in these high mountains, okay, which is very rugged territory and that has these canyon walls that are sheer cliffs and their hooves allow them to stand and to navigate these canyon walls in ways that we never could. So if you look at the picture that I took, and I'm going to show the picture multiple times through this podcast. So if you're listening to this as an audio, I'm so sorry. You're going to have to go to the God's Glory Gallery to look at this picture because you see these bighorn sheep that are just hanging out on this canyon wall. Now, just so that you know, I wasn't very close to them. I actually had a telephoto lens so that I was able to get that close, but they were about halfway up this canyon wall, and they're just hanging out there, knowing that they're perfectly safe. The people who were down on the side of the road looking at the picture, taking pictures and looking at them, there is no way that they were gonna be able to get up there to them, and if they even tried, these sheep, I've seen them, they would be able to climb up the canyon wall that we'd be looking at saying, "How are they doing that?" But their hooves are designed in a way that allow them to stand on ledges that are, like, 5 inches wide and just stand there. But then the bottom of their hooves is textured in a way that gives them some, grip as they are climbing up the side of the walls. Now, you may think that this is just something that they develop every once in a while, but do you know what? Newborn sheep, um, are able to follow their mom in climbing within a day of being born. They are not just equipped, but they are given this identity, this ability, this way of thinking that they are able to do this very soon after they are born. And it's really part of their ability to survive in this environment because there are natural predators for them. Bears, coyotes. I think I heard mountain lions or cougars are also or predators for these animals. But because they can climb these canyons, they can get away from the predators just by doing that. But they also have the ability to jump spans in between that are in the canyons of up to 6 feet to escape predators. Also, their eyes are situated, and this was something I found very interesting because um, you can get a really close up picture of the face and the eyes of the bighorn sheep, but their eyes are situated in their head on the two separate sides of their head, but then their pupils are horizontal. And it's so that they can have this almost panoramic view of what's going on around them with a focus of what's happening in front of them. So as they are traveling, as they are going along, as they're walking along the canyon or the path or whatever they're doing, they can keep track of where they're going, but they can also keep watch for the dangers that are around them. They are uniquely designed to be part of the environment in which they exist. God created them so that they could live and do what they are created to do. Whenever they were up on this canyon wall, just kind of hanging out, they were being who they were created to be and doing what they were created to do. They were righteous in the sense that they were following the design of their creator. Now, what does that mean for us? And whenever I think about that, I always have to go back, okay, so we know that God is righteous. We now know that sheep, in the way that they exist as part of God's creation, are righteous. But what does that mean for us? Now, we have to remember that we were created to be righteous people. God created us in the beginning with a design to be in relationship with Him, to be His image bearers, so that we could reflect perfectly who He is. But you have to remember that that was messed up by a serpent, a tree, and a really bad decision to not believe in who God was. Now, and ever since, we have been living out of a corrupted, an unrighteous identity. We've been living out of an identity that keeps us from being who we were created to be, so that we're unable to do the things that God created us to do. We talk about being human as if this is the way that we were meant to be. But this isn't how we were meant to be. This isn't what we were created for. This is our own distorted version by trying to live independent of God's plan and God's design. If you think about that, that is the challenge. That is the difficulty that we have, is that instead of being servants of God, as it says in Malachi, submitted to Him and being the people that He created, He designed us to be, being righteous because of that, then we have decided to go our own way. It's that idea of all we of sheep have gone astray, everyone to his own way. And that's that idea that we have, instead of following our creator and being the people that he wanted us to be, that we've decided to do our own thing. It would be like these righteous sheep right now, the sheep that are in the canyon deciding, "Do you know what? I don't feel like hanging out on these canyon walls and having to come down and eat grass that is down in the down there, making myself susceptible to predators, but I know I can go back up and I can just, like, sit there and digest it." But what I wanna do is I wanna be able to live out on the plain where there's all of this grass and there's the river, and I just wanna stay there, and I just wanna not have to deal with the snow that's up at the higher elevations. I just wanna kinda do this other thing that, um, isn't whatever all the other sheep are doing and not even what I'm created for, but I just wanna kinda do that, and so they decide to go off on their own and do something else. But see, that's the thing is that our perspective has become so distorted, so corrupted that we act that what we are living is the good life. But what it is it's really a deception or a counterfeit of what is really possible as we become as we have the opportunity to return to the design that God has created for us. If you remember in Isaiah 64:6, it says that we have all become like someone unclean, and all of our righteous deeds are as unclean garments. See, because we have decided to choose to be independent from God and define who we are and define what we want to do, independent of Him, what that means is that we have all become like someone who is unclean, unrighteous. And because of that, then everything that we do, everything that we think is good, everything that we think is part of searching out to be the good life is really something that is the opposite of that. It's keeping us separated from God. It's keeping us separated and keeping us distant from the life that we were created for. But you have to remember that we weren't created for this. And God's desire for us is to not live like this. And He made a way for us through Jesus to restore the relationship that we lost so that we can be restored and He can restore to us that righteous identity that He designed for us. He wants us to be able to put away, to put to death the old identity, the identity that is keeping us in bondage and separated from Him, so that we can then live the life that He wants us to live. Now, we have access to that initial design whenever we put our faith in Jesus, and that we've accepted that. We lived separate from Him and we lived an unrighteous life, and that we want to live this new life that He has for us. He provides the access. He provides us that new identity. But the challenge that we always have to remember, though, is that even though He's provided the access, we still need to access it so that we can then be transformed, to be changed, to be restored back to being the people that God created us to be, to live out of the design. That is that big word that in the Bible it calls sanctification. We use the word transformation, but it's that process of redeeming our identity. It's that idea of taking our old corrupted identity and putting it to death and leaving it behind so that we can put on the new identity. And so the challenge that we have is that we want to be more like those righteous sheep. See, remember, from God's perspective, we are already positionally righteous. From God's perspective, because of what Jesus did, everything has been forgiven, past, present, and future. And He has given to us, He has endued to us our new identity. And in eternity, we have that new identity already. But now, here, positionally, we are not yet living out of the identity that God has for us. So we're still living much of our lives out of that old corrupted identity that we've spent decades or years developing. And just as much as it took years to develop that new identity, no, that old identity, it's going to take time and it's going to take patience and it's going to take work. And it's going to be a process of walking with God in the process of becoming who God wants us to be. Now, I want you to understand this. This is not just trying to act righteous. This is not just trying to do things that we think are good. It's whenever we go out, and I hear this all the time, it's like, "Go out and be good." Well, that's a great statement. We wanna go out and be righteous. We don't want to go out and just try to do good things. And the difference is that we could think this is the whole problem that we had before with our corrupted identity is that we thought that something was good, but then God looked at it because it was not part of who he created us to be. That was considered unrighteous, no matter how good that was. It was not part of his design, his plan. It wasn't that it was doing something that we thought was good, that we thought was righteous, but it didn't line up with his standard, his norm. And that's the thing is that he is the standard. Whenever we're thinking about being righteous, it's not about what we think, it's about what he thinks, what he believes, what he designed, what he created us for. So it's not about trying to act righteous, but it's really trying to transform our lives, our identities, so that we are the people that God created us to be, so that as we are living, that we are doing the things that God created us to do, which are then righteous acts, righteous deeds. But whenever we just try to do things that are righteous, it's kind of like a wolf putting on sheep's clothing. It is we're still living out of our corrupted identity, but we're going to try and do things that other people may see as good so that we can be viewed as good. But that's not what God created us for. He created us with with an identity in mind. He created something unique for you. He created an identity unique for me that if we live out of those identities, then we're going to find the life that we were always designed for. So we want to become who God created us to be. We want to put to death our old identity. We want to replace it with the new identity that God has for us. And then that's the only time that we are then going to really experience the life for which we were created. The one that represents the masterpiece that we were meant to be. And this involves transformation. Not just the transformation of our actions, but the transformation of our identity, the transformation of our heart, who we are at our core, so that the things that we just do naturally, that we have the desire to do, that we want to do, line up with who God created us to be. And then we are glorifying Him because we're reflecting who He created us to be. This is the transformation that God wants to work in you and through you. And this isn't done on our own. This is done by the cooperation of his spirit because of what Jesus did, and God has the design. But we are called to participate so that we can become the righteousness of Christ by being the identity, the sheep that he meant for you. So if I think about that, that idea of I just want to be a sheep, hmm, has a different perspective now because now I see that those sheep were living a life that they were meant for, that they were designed for, that they were created for. And I want to be a person that is living out of the design, the identity that God created me to be. So, as you look at the image that I took from that photo shoot, I put onto that a verse that reminds us that there is a righteous path that he has for each of us. And those sheep, those righteous sheep, are living the life that God designed them for. And God made a way for us to be restored so that we can live out of the identity that he created for us, so that we can once again not just have the righteousness of Jesus given to us in eternity, but we can practically live out that righteousness. And it's when that we live out that righteousness, other people are going to see God in us and through us. And then we're going to be able to truly impact and make a difference in the world around us. Because then we are truly representing and reflecting and being the image bearers that God created us to be. I just want to thank you for joining me as I took some time to think about this idea of being righteous through one of these images in our God's Glory Gallery. Now, before you go, please take a second and like this episode. And if you can, please subscribe to this episode, no, to this channel in YouTube. Or if you listen to this podcast as a podcast, please subscribe or follow this podcast, whether you follow it in Apple Podcast, Apple Prime, Spotify, iHeart, wherever you listen to your podcast. This will help other people have the ability to be exposed to this message. Now, the He So I Project is here to help you discover who God is so that you can become who you were created to be, just like we've been talking about in those righteous bighorn sheep in Rocky Mountain National Park. Now, we provide resources to help people in this identity journey. Now, part of that is the images from our God's Glory Gallery. If you haven't had the chance to take a look at those images, please go to our website, redeemingidentity.com, and you'll see in the menu an option for God's Glory Gallery. Now, these images have been selected so that they can remind us of who God is and what his design for us is as we look at them. Because it really does help whenever we have images around us that constantly remind us of who God is and who he has created us to be. This is part of just that process of transformation, of letting your mind be constantly filled with things that help us along that identity journey. So please take some time, visit the gallery online at our website, and we're going to be adding more images to encourage and support you in this journey. I just want to thank you once again for joining me in this discussion. I look forward to you in our next episode of the He So I Project, and we will be getting back to some discussions about who God is with my co-host, Pastor Eric Miller. But thank you so much for joining me for this episode, and I look forward to returning each month to have this discussion of who God is by looking at other aspects and other images from his creation. We will be praying for you, and we thank you for joining us.